try to check that out. Okay, so we are being recorded. So go ahead, Steve. Just kick it off.
Well, very good Thursday, and welcome to Travers Week and the Travers Stakes Racelands webinar. Absolutely glorious here in upstate New York, and it's going to stay that way through one of the most anticipated Travers in anyone's memory. I cannot recall this racetrack and the racing community in the area as mystified by an edition of this race as they are of this 148 Travers on Saturday. We'll try to utilize every tool we can find in Stats Racelands to help you decipher it, as well as the rest of a card that is wildly competitive and interesting. Laffit Pincay III, he's in town with the NBC crew as they'll be covering the race, of course. The Breeders' Cup Betting Challenge sequence has taken the NBC crew to Chicago and to San Diego and to Oceanport and you name it. And they're going to be in town for a big Saturday, so we're looking forward to Laffit. Craig Walker, of course, from the development team at Stats Racelands as well. We'll utilize everything we can think of, true odds, the pace factors, everything that you use in Stats Racelands to help you negotiate cards like this and cards Monday through Sunday. Reaching out to see if Laffit is with us.
Steven, how are you?
LT3. I wish I was over by the track right now, but we'll do it this way. We had so much fun leading into Derby, and certainly we're at a point in the calendar where the 3-year-olds, when they come to Saratoga, typically we're not as uncertain about the 3-year-old championship, but here's a race that's going to go a long way to decide it.
Yeah, Steve, I can't remember the last time in late August a chase for a 3-year-old championship was this wide open, where nobody had separated themselves from the pack, which was adding intrigue and making this Travers that much more important. Clearly, anyone who's done anything this year with a significant win on their resume, a win in the Travers, they go right to the front of the class. You ask 10 different people who they like in the Travers, you get 14 different responses. And you're right, the electricity, the excitement, just getting on the flight yesterday, the connection, everybody was talking about Saratoga this weekend and had their racing forms out. And who do you like in the Travers? The identity of the Travers. A couple of years ago, it was all about one horse. It was about American Pharaoh, 15,000 showing up to see him gallop, and that's great. But when you have the Derby winner in Always Dreaming, Preakness winner Cloud Computing, Derby winner Tapper, the fact that this has only happened 3 times ever, it's exciting.
Not only will there be the Travers discussion, but we're going to talk about the sequence of 7 furlong races. We'll get to all 3 of them. We're going to start with the Alan Jerkens, the former King's Bishop, the Ballerina as well for the fillies and mares, also the Forego, and a unique situation to have 3 Grade 1 7 furlong races conducted back-to-back on the racetrack. Craig Walker, we're going to start out, and we'll talk about the Jerkens, but let me first say hello and check in with you.
The last time that I was on with you guys, we had all route turf races, and this time we have these exciting 7 furlong races. So it's all Grade 1s all day. So these big days have really changed the way that you handicap these last couple of years, and changed the way everyone gets ready for the races. And these are really exciting days. They've worked out really well.
And by the way, guys, who was it? There was a Stats Racelands webinar right before the Arlington Million and the Beverly D. Loved Rain Goddess going in, and somebody pointed out that Aidan O'Brien was 1 for 20 what in his last however many starts here in North America.
Yeah, that was me. Yeah.
That in its was cause for pause and hesitation, and the statistics didn't look any better after that particular afternoon with O'Brien bringing Rain Goddess over and her underperforming in the Beverly D, I thought. So thanks for the heads up.
Well, and we'll talk about Aiden O'Brien when it comes to the sword dancer. And, of course, Idaho involved back three. We got a lot of Euros to discuss, including an unusual Euro in the Forego. We'll get to that in a minute. Pete, let's start this with the Alan Jerkens. And this race, the King's Bishop, has always been an important, I would say, changing, a race that changes horses' direction. And I think the most pronounced horse in recent memory that changed things up and turned back for the 7/8 was Hard Spun. And Hard Spun had made the deal to stand at Darley as a stallion, and there were incentives in that contract for him to win a Grade 1. And rather than try the Travers against Street Sense, they directed him to the Alan Jerkens. And clearly, that is a storyline we hear so often. Laffit, you can start the discussion, and we have a horse doing exactly that in Practical Joke.
It's very similar, Practical Joke, Hard Spun. They needed that Grade 1 for Hard Spun. An exciting race. He held off that late charge from the Juddmonte horse, first defense in that King's Bishop, Hard Spun, who had run second in the Derby and second eventually in the Breeders' Cup Classic. But Practical Joke, pound for pound, might be one of, if not the most talented 3-year-olds in this year's crop. If he's been performing and being asked to do things he's not designed to do. His trainer, Chad Brown, tells you he's a one-turn horse. How talented is he if he's a one-turn horse running second in the Fountain of Youth, second in the Bluegrass, fifth in the Derby, the list goes on and on, third in the Haskell with a little bit of trouble. Finally, that turn back to a middle distance. Regardless of what he did in the Haskell, most horses that get beat a half length in the Haskell, they go to the Travers. Here he is in the King's Bishop, now the Alan Jerkens. So with Practical Joke, I hate the rail going 7/8. Typically can't stand the rail going 7 furlongs. But if you go back and you watch the Dwyer, which you can do on Stats Race Lens, you watch the Dwyer, he's in a box, he's in a trap, and he's handy enough where Rosario was able to snatch him up, go around horses, and found his stride immediately, accelerated like a good sprinter should or a good middle distance horse should, and simply outclassed that field. He also won the Champagne from the rail. So from a trip standpoint, from a class standpoint, the fact that this is what he's supposed to do all along, Practical Joke to me. He's only 5-2 on the morning line. I'm interested to see what happens on the tote board, but one of the horses that I absolutely love on the entire Travers program. And then again, he's the only horse. He's 2 for 2 at Saratoga, and the only horse with multiple wins at the track.
All true. Keep walking through. Who else in there, Laffit?
It's not creative, but sometimes you have to play the hand you're dealt, and there's American Anthem. I don't need to tell you, nobody needs to tell you how good Mike Smith and Bob Baffert are, but this is part of what makes Stats Race Lens so useful, is that just because someone says that someone's good statistically doesn't make it so. You can go back and check these things and see how effective they actually have been. Baffert with Smith in graded stakes races, 35 starts, they're winning with better than half. 54% winners with Smith and Baffert. Again, they're good together, but maybe you didn't know they were that good. They're in the money 74% of the time as well, and you see the ROI. The post position for American Anthem, just from race shape, post position 6.5 furlongs, or 7 furlongs on dirt. That's 63 starts, winning at 24%. 46% in the money, and a 16% ROI. Oftentimes, for me, 7 furlongs, the extended sprint, it is about trip. From an American Anthem from the outside, Mike Smith able to break, take a look inside, and kind of take it to everyone else in terms of what he wants to do, as opposed to being buried inside, which Practical Joke is going to have to deal with, and be able to make those decisions, American Anthem and Mike Smith. Also, the shipping angle. California shippers to New York. In Grade 1 races, 9 starts, you see the numbers. 56% win, 67% in the money, and a solid ROI.
also gets to set up shop outside. In fact, when we get to the Forego, we'll talk about your Fong. And Craig, maybe when you take the mic, you can talk a little bit about the race flow, and we can use True Odds and we can use the pace projector. What about Cold Front in here, Laffit? I mean, here's one of these horses that got a late start on his campaign as a 3-year-old. They're very regularly are horses like this that show up in the Amsterdam, and then they parlay it into the King's Bishop, now the Jerkens. It's going to take a while to stop calling this the King's Bishop. But how do you view Cold Front coming in here for Fletcher and LaPenta?
Yeah, before you get to the numbers, with Cold Front, it's a simple question of how good is he? Is he good enough to tangle with Practical Joke? Is he good enough to tangle with American Anthem? I think he gets the right trip. I think Takaful is quicker and goes after the lead. I think Phi Beta Express goes after the lead. Cold Front should be in a perfect stalking trip, sitting just off of these horses, undefeated. It's Pletcher and Velasquez. We know how that story goes. So with Todd Pletcher, and whether you're talking about him riding for Hunter Castellano, riding for Pletcher, or Velasquez riding for Todd Pletcher, at Saratoga specifically, in the last year, going back, you go 110 starts. This is just, again, this is a combination that we're familiar with, that we know is good, that we know is productive. Pletcher with Castellano or Velasquez, 30% win rate and 61% in the money. And you see the 10% ROI. Also with Todd Pletcher in this race, Steve, only 3 horses since, I think it's 93, won both the Amsterdam and the King's Bishop. Just remind one of them who Todd Pletcher did start. So Cold Front, there's a lot to like. It's just the acid test and whether he's good enough to beat the likes of Practical Joke and, of course, American Anthem. He will get the trip sitting off Takaful and Phi Beta Express.
Turn to you, Craig Walker. What did you find poking through the stats?
Yeah, so I saw the same stats that Laffit pointed out with Baffert and Mike Smith. One other thing is Baffert also is strong with last out winners. So last year he's had 82 starts and 43% winners with a plus 11% ROI. When I look at the True Odds, and we're going to look at the race projection, one of the other things I liked about the horse is that the race projection projects it to be a slow early pace, and American Anthem looks like it's going to be setting right there close to that pace, and so I think that gives the horse an advantage over Practical Joke. Practical Joke was the other horse that I like, just like Laffit did, and for this horse, Laffit pointed out that the horse is 2 for 2 at Saratoga, and winning the Hopeful was one of the races last year. But also, if you look at races that are just a mile or less, so the Dwyer Stakes, and then you look at the Champagne, the horse won both of those too. So the horse is, if it's running a mile or less, it's lights out, and like Laffit said, Chad Brown said, this is a one-turn horse. So he is going to be tough to beat, but I'm just thinking American Anthem, I'll give a slight edge just because of the pace advantage, and I just see it as a 2-horse race.
It's interesting, and in terms of Cold Front and his his prospects in here.
Yeah, no, the horse obviously is very talented, but I'm just going to go with the more seasoned horses. The horses that have been banging around in these Grade 1 races. I just think they always have an advantage over the newcomers, unless the newcomer has some kind of fast pace where it's going to be the only closer, or a slow pace where it's going to be the only front runner, and that's not the case for Cold Front. So that's just the way that I handicap these types of Grade 1 races with the newcomers.
Quickly, Steve, the divisive horse seems to be Takaful, the 2 sprint wins by a combined 13 1/4 lengths. What are you expecting from Takaful?
Well, you've got an interesting referendum on Kieran McLaughlin in both of the 3-year-old races, with Takaful here and then with Fayek later. And Kieran, for a second year in a row, burst out of the gate at the meet with a sequence of wins. He did the same thing a year ago, 2 wins on opening day and I think 4 wins opening weekend. And the way both Fayek and Takaful, Takaful was riding the ship. Fayek was moving into sort of a development, the next stage. So no matter what you think of Takaful in this race, you may get a little bit of a read on maybe what to expect later. I don't know what to expect. I mean, I was surprised enough that Takaful could put Humpty Dumpty back together again and run the kind of race he did at the beginning of the meet. I am anxious to see Mike Bessie and Mike Welsh's DRF Clocker report on Friday afternoon. It'll break about 4 o'clock. Very anxious to see, what some of these horses, later on we got Good Samaritan to talk about as well. Coming out of the Jim Dandy win, I've got, we got a real series of mysteries to unsolve when it comes to horses that ran here at the meet on a racetrack that has been difficult for a lot of horses. And so, that is based on certainly what Elate did in the Alabama. She had run the great race against Abel Tasman in the Coaching Club American Oaks. She comes right back and runs, as good or better. So there is a lot to be said about horses who have already run successfully here earlier in the meet. Not to use Arrogate as an example of this discussion, but even with the improved effort that he showed at Del Mar on Saturday, that obviously is a horse that is not enjoying the surface that he's running on. And, there is a parallel here. Both of these summer racetracks have been heavier and slower than in years past. And there's a lot to like about a horse that's already run well over this racetrack. The American Anthem presence in here is part also of a storyline, that goes back with Baffert to Belmont Day and the unbelievable showing, West Coast and American Anthem and who am I missing? And well, Abel Tasman as well that day. But the coming back in here, you got this trio, Drafang, we'll talk about in a little bit in the Forego. Are they going to be able to come back to New York and perform at a similar level? And American Anthem, again, is your first referendum on this topic. So the racetrack equation, Laffit, is a real issue. And you've been home in California for part of the summer, and I'm sure you've heard the same discussion with what's going on at Del Mar.
Yeah, well, it seems like the track here has tightened up a little bit, and it's been quicker and not quite as deep and demanding and tiring at Saratoga. At Del Mar, it seems like everyone's saying the same thing 10 different ways. And Bob Baffert being all class and saying all the right things and handling the scenario with Arrogate and the poor performance in the loss in the San Diego, the very good performance in the loss in the Pacific Classic. But he doesn't want to blame the racetrack, but I can't remember the last time I saw a horse struggle so much and earn a 114 Beyer speed figure. You can tell he's not getting a hold of the track, and that's not blaming anyone. That's not a track superintendent thing. That's just an athlete not excelling over a certain playing surface. Steve, you're a big Philadelphia Eagle fan. Let's say that for some reason the Eagles wind up with some high octane, running up and down the field type of offense this year. They're scoring 40 points a game. They win the NFC East. They secure a first-round bye. And in the divisional playoff game, it rains and it pours and the field's all chewed up. And some team comes in that can run the ball, play defense, and they lose 16-13. That's what happens sometimes. The surface in many sports, outdoor sports can dictate the outcome of a game. Mike Smith, riding Arrowgate, what he keeps saying is that he just can't seem to push off. He's not getting that leverage, which is why it looks like he's struggling. It looks like he's struggling because he is struggling. So you're right, both at Del Mar, and certainly I think all eyes will be paying very close attention to the form in the dirt races early on in the Travers program, who's winning, from where, are the horses passing each other? Does it look like it did anything Jim Dandy Day? Jim Dandy Day seems so quirky. I'm still trying to get a read on what the track really was on that particular afternoon. If the rail was as golden as everyone seems to believe it is, you'll be watching where those winners are coming from, and certainly the final times and time. And that's why, you wind up handicapping on the fly if the track turns up a little bit different than you anticipated.
Well, one thing we do get is the 3 7-furlong races in a row, and you'll be able to get a read. Certainly figure makers will be able to appreciate there won't be any time between races. The track can't change all that much in 45 minutes. So the second of those, or actually ahead of the Jerkens, is the Ballerina, going as the 7th. Let's talk about it, and Laffit, start us off.
I felt, Steve, like I was leaning towards chalk in big names most of the afternoon. It's a Travers program. These stars have come out, except in this race, in the Ballerina. I really like Highway Star. First off, the fact that, has anyone lost exiting the Ogden Phipps? How many next out winners? You realize it's going to be a productive race. It's a grade 1 race, but still. First, let's start with post and trip. Outermost post position at 6.5 furlongs or 7 on dirt at Saratoga. We have a sample size of 63 starts, 24% win. 24% win, 46% in the money. And you look at the ROI, something popped up on my screen. I apologize, 16% ROI. So from a trip standpoint, Highway Star is situated in the right spot. She has lost, I think, once around one turn. She's either 6 for 7, 7 for 8, whatever the case may be, around one turn, and that loss was against Songbird. She's not trained by Baffert. She's not trained by Fletcher. She's not trained by Chad Brown. But Highway Star here, because of that, is going to slip in between the cracks, and I think has a big shot to shake things up in this grade 1 Ballerina.
Interesting. All right.
Also, 7 furlongs, runs fresh, runs well fresh. So a lot going for her. 10-1, I think, on the morning line.
Wow.
You're not buying
Greg?
it.
I like her as a horse. No, I like her as a horse.
Yeah. Then one of the things Laffit mentioned too, I just wanted to point out again that we have it as in past webinars. When you click on a chart of a past race, it's a little slow. All the horses that have circles, like Laffit said, who's lost out of this race? Songbird, Paid Up Subscriber, Karina Mia, Verstel, and Factory of Faith all won their next start. And so this is a feature that we added to Racelands a couple months ago, and the stats development team is actually working on some ways now that we're gonna be highlighting these races. So in the next month or two, they should have the development done where the race number will be highlighted in the line, and also you'll be able to set up in your angles. You'll be able to set up. You'll have some variations on what to use a key race tied to these the circled horses, and then that way any horse coming out of that race that hadn't ran yet, they'll be highlighted, or even if it was 2 races back, we're going to have angles tied to that. So that's something that's I'm looking forward to. That's going to be exciting to have, Craig, to add to the angle power. Yeah,
it's just really important. It's key because you know a race like the grade, it should be productive. They're grade 1 caliber fillies and mares, but how productive was it? And having access to these statistics and the deeper analytics and be able to check that, so that's how productive it was. 5 next out winner having that option. It's a great tool.
Yeah. So for me in this race, I landed on Paula silver lining. One thing that I liked about it was the sire Go Sapper. It has good statistics when you're just looking at it. And now it's a small sample size of 17, but I just at boutique meets I like to try to find things that have a good win percentage and a good ROI, even if the sample sizes are on the smaller side. So I like that about the horse. And then the other good angles is Jose Ortiz. I mean, even though everyone knows how good he is, he's still, over the last year, if you were betting him every time at Saratoga, you'd still be making 16% on your money. So, I mean, he's always involved when I'm playing tickets most of the time at Saratoga. And also, when we look at the true odds, at the race projection, this is a horse that looks like it's going to control the early pace and so be out there near the lead. And it's another one that says this is going to be on the slower side, the pace figures. Whenever you're looking at these numbers, so this is a 101 early pace figure and a 105. When you compare them to this class rating, which is normally what the winner's Equibase speed figure is going to be, somewhere around that number, when they're that much lower, you know that is projected to be a slow pace. So that's the big advantage that horse has for me. The other horse I like is Karina Mia, which we saw had a one out of the Phipps, one in the Shine Again. And that's why the name was circled when we looked at that Phipps chart. And this horse is also, when we just look at the true odds, it's the when I saw it, it's the it was the other contender as far as when you're looking at the adjusted true odds, and so that was the other reason I liked it. And then also, it's not a highly profitable angle, but when Chad Brown uses Javier Castellano, they have a high win percent, 27%. The ROI is -7, but that's, I mean, very good when you compare it to just normal ROIs. So, which just random betting's -25. So, anything that's, you know, to me, even some angles that have high win percentages that might be -15, I look at, but especially anything under -10, that's a plus sign as well. So, those are my two contenders. Nothing real exciting odds-wise, not like Laffit's horse, but
yeah, I'm disappointed I wasn't one on the 10-to-1 shot here. Highway Star and this Ballerina. Steve, I don't mean to commandeer your ship. There's an offer that's going to expire soon for Stats Race Lens. Before I forget, just $99, right?
Yeah, that's
correct.
Yeah. So that's the one where anyone can get a quarterly subscription to Race Lens for $99. That ends on the 27th, and you have to use the promo code Travers 99. So that's what anyone out there that it can be any customer. If you're already a customer and you'll add on your time, or if you're new to Race Lens and you want to get started, and I'll carry you through to the Breeders' Cup. So it's a great deal.
Now takes you all the way through the Breeders' Cup prep season, and of course Laffit and the NBC team will be doing that on television. And we'll be doing it on radio, and we'll be having plenty of webinars with Stats Race Lens. But it also will take you past Breeders' Cup and into November, including some of the great racing that will get the Delta Downs and the Jackpot. And, of course, there's the Fall Festival in New York, Cigar Mile Day, a lot of great racing. Basically, you're getting September, October, November. Travers 99. They've made it much easier for you to remember. Travers 99 is your promo code, and as Laffit alluded, the annual subscription continues 30% off, which basically gets the true odds cost down to under $1 a day, and $2 a day for the entire system. Cannot be beat. Let's press in, and we'll use this to exactly 30 minutes in. we'll kick off the Travers conversation. And this is a race, back to a mile and a quarter. We've had any number of regional derbies, the Indiana Derby, the Ohio Derby, West Virginia Derby. We have the Grade 1 Haskell, a mile and an eighth, but we're back to the 10 furlong distance. And that is, I cannot drive it home enough. I mean, it is a different animal. And remember that it's part of the equation. And we'll kick it off. Laffit, how are you approaching this?
I have changed my mind 6 or 7 times in the last week. From Tappert and how well he's been training, his stock continues to rise. Why? Because everyone else is disappointed at one point or another. So he looks that much better while doing nothing on the sidelines. I really like the way Good Samaritan looked in the Jim Dandy, and finally getting that chance on dirt that we thought we might see going back to the Breeders' Cup when he was cross-entered in the juvenile turf and the juvenile. So Randy Moss sat next to me last Saturday, and it came up to selection time for the Pacific Classic, and he says, I can't ignore how poor Arrowgate's performance was in the San Diego and pick him at this short a price. That was the logic. He wasn't willing to excuse the most recent effort, and he got beat again. He ran really well, but he got beat again. So I get it with Cloud Computing, why he's 8-1 on the morning line. In that same theory, he ran so bad in his last race that there's no way I can back him next out. The difference is Cloud Computing isn't 1-5. Like I said, he's 8-1 on the morning line. I expect him to go lower, because when all things are equal, and that's what it feels like, Steve, in terms of the horses, all things being equal, you lean towards the stats that we're going to dig up, and you lean towards the human element. Javier Castellano is where I start with Cloud Computing. By the way, love the rail trip. I did love the rail trip, CA trip, very similar to what he got in the Preakness, sitting off Always Dreaming in Classic Empire. But Castellano, all-time leader, just like that, in the Travers, having won the Travers 5 times in an 11-year span. From 2006 to 2016, 5 Travers wins for Castellano. And Cloud Computing, I'm not saying he's as good as Bernardini, but in something he does mirror him from a certain perspective. He won his Preakness in his 4th career start, just like Bernardini, and he came back to win the Travers. Castellano rode them both. Now you look at the numbers, excuse me, you know how good these guys are together. Chad Brown with Javier Castellano, they win a lot of races together. They win a lot of big races together. 27% win, they're in the money 59% of the time. The issue is the ROI. The ROI isn't necessarily there, simply because, I mean, these guys drive the price down. This is when you zig when everybody else zags. I might change my mind 3 more times before the Travers, but you know he's better than you saw in the Jim Dandy. And what it comes down to is this: who is Cloud Computing's true identity? The colt that looked so good, so impressive, running down a game Classic Empire in the Preakness, or what he's done throughout the remainder of his career? I tend to believe what I saw with my own 2 eyeballs in Baltimore. I think we see Preakness version of Cloud Computing in the Travers.
I won't argue. Press on. Who else deserves command attention?
West Coast his price is going to be determined by 2 factors. A, what Arrowgate did in the Travers last year, right? 11-1. Bob Baffert brings him in. Bob Baffert was high on it, and Baffert's high on West Coast, and how American Anthem and Dre Fong perform earlier. If it feels like another Baffert assault on a major New York racetrack, as it was on the undercard of the Belmont, and what he does on the undercard of the Travers, that's what's going to dictate West Coast price from that morning line. The human element, Baffert and Mike Smith. You look at them in graded stakes races in the past year with 35 starts, they're winning better than half, 54% wins. I know they team up together with a lot of favorites and a lot of good horses, but they're winning. Why try to beat them in situations where they're going to just beat you? In the money better than 3/4 of the time, and 4% ROI for Baffert and Smith. Baffert shipping in graded stakes races over the past year. He's done that 34 times, and he's won nearly half of them. 47% Baffert shipping in the money, 65%. You see the ROI there. Also, Bob Baffert at 1.25 miles, the distance that he's won, the 4 Kentucky Derbies at. He has a couple of Travers to his credit now. Past 5 years, 39 starts, winning with 31% of his starters going a mile and a quarter in the money with better than half a solid ROI. So the combination of Baffert and Smith, you know about. Baffert excels when it comes to the classic American racing distance, West Coast to make his presence felt. Then you go to the Derby winner, Always Dreaming, and as disappointing as he's been since the Kentucky Derby. First, the horse. I talked to Richard Migliore earlier today, and one of his concerns is that he doesn't see any change in Always Dreaming physically. He says he looks like the same colt that he saw at Gulfstream in his allowance race, in his Florida Derby, in his Kentucky Derby. He looked like he was about where he was supposed to be, but he still sees that same horse. Migliore has a great eye for horse flesh, and that is a little bit of a concern. While at the same time, he says that Taffert has continued to develop. However, he is the Derby winner, and while it does bother me that he went out to a 48-second half mile and folded up in the Jim Dandy, because that happened, maybe he gets left alone and maybe he makes the lead. And you look at Todd Pletcher here, the statistics. Last race where he saddled a beaten favorite, again, Pletcher on a beaten favorite, past year, 162 starters, beaten favorites trained by Todd Pletcher. He's come back and won 30% of the time. In the money, 60% of the time. And the ROI there, again, not the greatest of ROIs, but it seems like the Pletcher, the defeated favorites do respond. He does tinker. He makes whatever adjustments he needs to make. And I actually thought he ran okay in the Jim Dandy. Like I said, Derby winners should win in that scenario. Who's uncomfortable in front, 48-second half mile, he should win, but then that goes back to how the track was playing Jim Dandy day. Yeah, the rail might have been good, but if it's a tiring track, it's not going to help at all. Pletcher, Castellano, or Velasquez, we touched on this earlier. How good this combination is, winning it better than 30% of the time, in the money 61% of the time, and the ROI. So when these guys team up, you can always expect good things, but the statistics show that just how good they really are. So you have Velasquez back in the saddle, Todd Pletcher also second race off the layoff, with 3-year-olds or older in dirt routes over the past 5 years, winning at better than a 29% clip. So I think that the stats are there to support that Always Dreaming can bounce back to something much closer to what we saw in the Kentucky Derby. Like I said, I don't like what Mig said about him developing as an individual, but I believe in what I saw in the Florida Derby and the Kentucky Derby, and I think we'll see something closer to that in the Travers. And, you know, we can get the mile and a quarter and the only 3-year-old with 2 Grade 1 races wins on dirt.
Well, Craig, I'll turn to you.
Yeah, so for me, I'm just on West Coast all the way, and the reasons that Laffit pointed out were really strong. One of the other things is, you know, I like to use the true odds, the race projection, and so he through the algorithms that stats teams come up with, he looks to have a clear lead throughout the race, and you know, I don't know if that will happen or not. I mean, I know Always Dreaming has speed, but I've learned to find out that these race projections are very reliable, and I trust them. And doesn't mean it's always going to be right, but it's right more often than not when you kind of disagree with it, and you know, it helps make you money. And the other thing is like Laffit said, I'll show people how to do this real quickly. So when we had when I click on Bob Baffert and his stats come up, Laffit had to pull Bob Baffert as at a mile and a quarter. So all you have to do is click the modify button, and then if we just hit reset, that'll clear out all the filters that are there. And then so if, you can do this for a jockey, a trainer, a sire, a dam. When you go to the distance, you scroll down here, you can put in user-defined distances. So this is all in furlongs. So we just put in 10 furlongs here. We just apply it. And this is when we see the numbers that Laffit mentioned, that this is over the last 5 years, and it's the amount a quarter. Baffert out of 39 starters, 12 wins, so that's 31%, and the ROI plus 44%. That's the part that's exciting about it. So
ROI is incredible.
It's like what you said, Steve. Like the amount a quarter is a key factor here, and this is telling you that Baffert knows how to get these horses ready. I also did a we can look at this real quick on the sire Flatterer. I did a modification on him, and I just wanted to look at. I was just looking to see since this horse is coming to Saratoga. So I just say today's track since we're at Saratoga, and I just do the surface of dirt. And this is just showing, we just want to show people how simple it is to get answers to these types of things when you're going through your handicapping process. And you can see how Flatterer at Saratoga Dirt last 5 years, 94 starts, 90% wins, 43 in the money, and another positive ROI plus 52. So just everything that's about this horse, the amount a quarter going to Saratoga, those are all positive signs. And on the race projection, it's going to control the pace. So all that for me is just, it's a strong play. And so I'm all in on the West Coast. And it's, like Laffit said, it depends too. Maybe the price might not be as great as we want, but we've seen how, Chad Brown or Baffert, some of these, top trainers can just have big days, and you've seen that happening the last couple of years.
If you like West Coast, really like West Coast, you cross your fingers that Dreyfung and American Anthem will make the track.
A couple of points, Craig, off of that comment and the distance. Show them again how to gain the distance statistic, because it is not limited to a mile and a quarter. There are basically three major specialty distances: the mile and a quarter on dirt, the mile on the grass, 7/8 on the dirt, and you can also include the one-turn mile, the very specialized one-turn mile in the spirit of the Metropolitan or the Cigar Mile, or anything, any one-turn mile configuration. Those are specialty distances, and there are invariably trainers that have special prowess at this, as you just demonstrated, and it is worth the exercise. A turf mile is unique that way, because it's a fascinating blend of speed and pace dynamics. So people trainers that identify horses that are going to be successful, going a mile on the grass, that's a skill, and trainers are creatures of habit. And we talked actually today with Steve Haskins. Steve was bringing up the point, he was looking at the workout patterns of the horses coming into the Travers, and that how nobody worked beyond 5/8. And that's a little bit of a misnomer, because Baffert, of course, is somebody the horses may work 5/8, but in fact they actually galloped out a full work at 7/8 sometimes, certainly at 3/4. These are things you can see at ExpressBet TV. Laffit mentioned Rich Migliori. The XPTV product is just tremendous in terms of not even a product; it's free. You can watch almost everybody that that worked out in a facility that was filmable. So these are certain opportunities for players that can be exploited with a product like Stats Race Lens, and with an understanding of the distance. And then I'll speak for a second to the pricing. This is a race that, thanks to the competitiveness of the field on paper, there's not, you don't have to worry, I don't think, about not getting the price you were hoping for, especially if you're an exotics player, because the money is going to be spread out so extensively that any exacta, triple, and super pool, there's going to be all kinds of extraneous dead money covering all the different permutations. So don't worry that, you know, that if a horse is a couple of ticks, if you want a key off of West Coast and he ends up at 5-2 and you were hoping for 4-1, don't be dissuaded, because the value is going to be down the line building your ticket.
Isn't that what we love about the Derby? You get your price and the value. They call this race the Midsummer Derby for a reason. That's exactly what it feels like. It feels like the Derby minus 8 horses, they probably wouldn't have a chance.
It feels like the Midsummer Derby because you're in town.
That's good. Very flattery will get you everywhere, Steve Vick.
Oh, I love it. Travers for the ages. Let's look at the Forego. We've got plenty more to do. The Forego, the Sword Dancer. We'll probably get some thoughts about who likes Songbird to what degree in the personal Ensign. And let's dive into the Forego. Mind Your Biscuits, Laffit, has not had the best of summers here, with Chad or otherwise.
No pun intended.
He seems to have righted the ship from a workout standpoint in the last 10 days. But earlier in the summer, whether it was the racetrack or whatever was sort of ailing him, Chad Summers wasn't happy with the way he was working, and he bypassed the Vanderbilt and trained up to this spot. It is not an easy group that he faced.
Little bit of hesitancy here, Steve. And look, we're not talking about the late great Bobby Frankel, the late great Alan Jerkens. You know, Chad Summers relatively new with this. He's been doing a great job with Mind Your Biscuits, establishing him as the best sprinter in North America based on what we've seen this year. But maybe we'll go out west and get used to the track for the Breeders' Cup. I didn't like this work, and now here he is. That bugs me a little bit, even though as confident as Summers has been. He said all along he wants another shot at Dre Fong, the colt who beat him in the Breeders' Cup a season ago. He's been so impressive and so explosive. And if this was the year 2000, we'd be saying Arrowgate is suffering from the Dubai bounce. Well, Mind Your Biscuits is the antithesis to just that, as good as he looked since he returned from Dubai. You don't necessarily need numbers to tell you how good of a sprinter he is. I just wish from a race shape standpoint that he had somebody like, where's Green Grotto when you need him? Why isn't Green Grotto in here to keep Dre Fong company? It just seems like Dre Fong has a huge pace advantage. And the more I look at the race, it's hard to envision a scenario unless Dre Fong just isn't Dre Fong, that somebody doesn't go with him and he goes wire to wire. But Mind Your Biscuits, again, as of right now, is the top sprinter in North America. It's just, he's not arriving in, he hasn't gotten into this race as fluid as he has his previous races.
Now, some alternatives.
You know, again, it's a pace thing. I think the world of Awesome Slew. I always go back to his race on the undercard of the Derby in the Churchill Downs. I think you call it broken field running, when things start to fall apart, and he's not just a one-run plotting late running sprinter. He can cut. He can accelerate. He finds daylight and he re-accelerates. He's like a sprinter with multiple moves. He made a good run at Mind Your Biscuits in the Belmont Sprint Championship. This is his distance. This is where Awesome Slew is at his best, going 7 furlongs. So if for whatever reasons you don't believe in Dre Fong and you're not worried about the pace, because he does need some pace, does Awesome Slew, but at 7 furlongs, an athletic colt who's going to come with a big late run. I've always been a fan of his and expecting another big run from Awesome Slew. We move forward to Dre Fong and the defending Breeders' Cup Sprint champion. You have to wonder, and this isn't something you can find in statistics, as a racehorse, is he at all a little bit shell-shocked? Something funky happening in a race, as did a couple of weeks ago at Del Mar, ducking in. Does that affect a racehorse? Now the trip cross country, but he's not going to have to worry about ducking in. He's drawn towards the extreme outside, just like he was last year in the King's Bishop, winning from the 12 post. Drawn to the outside, he's going to be very comfortable out here. You have to ask yourself, is this the same racehorse that we saw as a 3-year-old? We don't know. We saw the one race where he lost Mike Smith, and that's it. You're banking on what he did towards the end of last season, winning a King's Bishop and winning a Breeders' Cup Sprint Championship. But if you trust in Bob Baffert, and now we look at the numbers, then you have your faith is in Trafalgar. That combination we've touched on, Baffert, Smith, we saw them click and click and click on the undercard of the Belmont Stakes. It's graded stakes races. It's the past year, it's the 54% win percentage. In the money, better than 3/4 of the time. This team means business, as we all know, but the numbers support the theory. Race shape, outside post positions. We touched on this in the King's Bishop. 6.5 furlongs, 7 furlongs on dirt at Saratoga. 63 starts, you're winning at 1/4 of the time. In the money, 46% of the time, and a 16% ROI there. So from those numbers, race shape, the human element, and the California shipping angle, California to New York in grade 1 races, it's a limited sample, but still better than half. Maybe it's just a Bob Baffert sample. 56% of the time, you see that in the money, 67%, and the 180% ROI. That's incredible.
That's an unbelievable number. Craig.
So for me, I just was trying to go with kind of an outsider type horse here. He's only 5-1 morning line. I think he's going to be a little better odds than that, and that's Divining Rod. And part of my thinking is kind of similar to what you touched on when you guys were talking about Hard Spun and Practical Joker. This horse had been, you see running, basically at the mile. I mean, he tried the mile in the 8th there at Keeneland, but he had been running mile distances and doing well. I mean, he just missed by head in the grade 1 cigar mile. And then he goes to Laurel, and they turn him back to 7 furlongs, and he runs a big race. I mean, it wasn't, a graded race, so the competition wasn't as good as what he had been facing. But it's one of those things where I do like these horses that turn back and have a big win at 7 furlongs, and just when they're coming back at 7 furlongs, I like to play them right back. And so it's basically just an idea that he did earn that 117 in the cigar mile, and it's projected here that a 119 is needed to win. So I think he can move up off that last race. It didn't take anything out of him. Had a little bit of a layoff there the second race, so he could be rounding into form, and he could just be a 7 furlong specialist. He could turn into. Well, I mean, we'll just see.
Delacroix's done an incredible job with Divining Rod.
Yeah, and of course, one thing we didn't touch on when we looked at the Jerkens, the fact that, of course, that he's got no Dozing, who is a little bit of a sleeper in the Alan Jerkens, and I'd be aware of his presence in there as well. A very good addition of the Forego as the sprinters start to take shape and take aim on Del Mar for Breeders' Cup. Let's move forward. Still got plenty to do, and that includes the Sword Dancer. And the movement of the Sword Dancer to Travers Day has obviously benefited the race. It used to be more toward the middle of Saratoga, and it collided somewhat with the Arlington Million Day, and the Sword Dancer looks a little stronger now as a Travers Day undercard grade 1. We've got Europeans that are invading, and then we've got some of the usual suspects when it comes to the American grade 1 and grade 2 turf runners. And Laffit, you're leaning toward a Euro.
Yeah, quickly, I talked to Nick Luck about this earlier today and asked him about Idaho. Obviously, he's the full brother to the defending Breeders' Cup Turf winner in Highland Reel. Says, though, when you look at them physically, Highland Reel's a little bit more sleek, a little bit more athletic, that Idaho's more robust. He's a thicker animal. You lose to Enable, who's a freak, and he's right there finishing third behind, Ulysses in the race over the seas, and the King George VI. Ulysses, if the Breeders' Cup Turf was tomorrow, he'd be the favorite. But you wonder if he's a little bit thicker, more robust, how he'll respond on the inner turf course. That was a conversation with Nick regarding Idaho, who's a 2-1 morning line favorite. Let's move to Erupt, who beat Idaho in the Canadian International last year. That's the good news. The bad news, that's his only win in a while now for Erupt. He quickens better than Idaho does Erupt. And here's what I thought what was interesting. The last couple of years, we saw the connections of Flintshire bring him out to the sword dancer seeking firmer ground. Now, Erupt, you look at his past performances, the last two races say soft ground, but Francis Graffard points out very quickly that they were two very different types of soft ground. That the race that he was virtually eased in, losing by 56 lengths or whatever it was, that ground, no bottom whatsoever. And in his solid effort in the Group 1-2 back, it says it's soft ground, but the footing was much better, and he was able to get a hold of it. And Francois Graffard thinks he's going to be that much better on firm ground, like Flintshire, looking for ground, harder ground here in the States. The reason that Erupt is here, and I think that, based on the concerns about Idaho and how he handles that inner turf course, I think for me it's Erupt. And Stéphane Pasquier, we're familiar with him, a very good rider. He's won Breeders' Cup races. I'm expecting a big effort from Erupt. As for the Americans, I think the best of the Americans is Money Multiplier. Number 5 for Chad Brown, who's going to have he's represented in every one except for one Grade 1 is Chad Brown. He ran great here last year, did Money Multiplier, and had some trouble. Go back and watch last year's Sword Dancer. He gets in traffic going around the far turn. He has to check. He has to take up. He has to glide. He was dealing with the Juddmonte relay team. While the Rabbit set the fractions for Flintshire, he also ran interference for Flintshire, and Flintshire snuck on the inside to go ahead and win. I'm not saying Money Multiplier beats him. I'm saying that he clearly, at this 1.5 mile distance here at Saratoga, he challenged one of the best racehorses in the world in this race last year. A solid prep in the Monmouth race. It was a weirdly run race, but I think that sets him up here. That was his first start of the year. I think that sets him up here for a big performance in the Sword Dancer. He feels almost a little bit unappreciated to me, does Money Multiplier. And you go back to the human element, Steve. Javier Castellano riding in graded turf route stakes. Past year, 72 starts, 31% wins. This is Castellano in graded stakes races on the grass, in the money, in 58% of the time, and you see a 51% ROI. That's Castellano. What is it now, a 3-time Eclipse Award-winning jockey? You figure, yeah, he's going to be good in these graded stakes races, but that good and a 51% ROI, and the fact that he's teaming up with Chad Brown, Castellano, over the past year, 259 starts, 27% win percentage. In the money, the ROI isn't there necessarily for these two. As we said earlier, the price always gets driven down when it's Castellano and Brown. But that Castellano on grass and graded stakes races, those numbers really did jump off the page.
Greg.
So for all the reasons that Laffit mentioned, I'm on Money Multiplier as my top pick. The other thing I liked is, a lot of times I'm going to use true odds, and so for this race, for me, the adjusted true odds kind of have the 3 horses that I do like. So Money Multiplier was going to be my top choice, but I am going to play Bigger Picture and Sadler's Joy as well. And so for Bigger Picture, one positive thing about him is, like we mentioned before, that Jose Ortiz, has great success at Saratoga. And then with Sadler's Joy, I like that the horse is, when you look at the the race is at a mile and a half for this horse. You can see that he has 2 wins and a second, and the one that he lost by that he ran second was just losing by a head to Glebe when he was closing, making up a lot of ground. So that's positive as well. So the other thing too is when we go, you can set these. You can set the defaults for these when you construct your PPs. You can set the defaults that show up down here for the research section. What's going to show there's settings that you can use, and for this one that came up on its own was for Thomas Albertrani. It was in the last 5 years with second race after layoff, and any horse that's 3 or older horse in turf routes. He has an okay win percent at 12, but the ROI is plus 18. So he does get horses ready that way. It's out of a lot of starts, so it just lets you know that he can win with this type. And I like that the price at 5-1. So I'm going against the Euro Series where the value is coming from on the horses I'm playing, but we'll just see how it goes with them.
Sadler's Joy should have won, I thought, the Bowling Green. And this isn't a Castellano critique, but he will benefit from a more patient ride from Julien Leparoux.
Well, an interesting group. And Euros, we didn't touch on the Euro involved in the Forego, which I thought was interesting. I can't recall, in fact, a main track sprinter showing up like this. Roth is the horse in question, a 5-year-old for Peter Shergan, who, of course, much better known than Andre Swoller. So we think of them bringing turf mares and German-bred types to Breeders' Cup and so forth. But an interesting invasion as we get ready to
Shake Albadoo, Steve.
Shake Albadoo. Nice, absolutely. Good job. Absolutely. There's a sprinter. I love it. Well, let's round this conversation out with personal Ensign talk. And, of course, it's shaped up as a Songbird versus Forever Unbridled matchup. Laffit, a lot of people came away unimpressed with Songbird's performance winning the Grade 1 Del Cap. But it may have been a little better than people are giving her credit for.
You would have thought it was such an interesting parallel watching the narratives constructed after Songbird wins the Delaware Handicap, and I maybe it was the same weekend or a week apart, I'm not sure, when Arrowgate ran up the track in the San Diego Handicap, and it's like we were lining up to build excuses for Arrowgate and tearing apart Songbird after winning yet another graded stakes race. The handicapping aside, I think it's special that you have a filly that's had this type of career and running in a race called the Personal Ensign, the great mare that retired undefeated at 13 for 13, and that Songbird is a nose short, beholder's nose short of being undefeated. And in that conversation, we'd be counting each win like we did with Zenyatta. But unlike Zenyatta, who really took advantage of the synthetic tracks in California, Songbirds made trip after trip after trip to Saratoga. Twice here last season. She was just in the Delaware race. She's, for some reason, it's become trendy to poke holes in her resume and to underestimate her. But here she is again. She's 2-5. I saw Jerry Hollendorfer in the lobby, so that's always a good sign. You know how good the filly is. Let's look at the human connections. Jerry Hollendorfer and Mike Smith. It seems like anybody and Mike Smith. But Hollendorfer and Smith graded stakes races over the past year. They win half the time at 50% in the money, 79%. The ROI isn't probably where you'd like it. We had that conversation with Brandon Castellano, price getting driven down. It hurts that ROI. And Hollendorfer shipping east. over the past season. He's won with 3 of 6. They normally fire, they're in the money. And again, you're taking a loss on that ROI. But if he's on the move and if you send these horses coast to coast, they are supposed to win. So the stats aren't going to tell you necessarily anything that you don't already know about Songbird. It would be a massive upset if she happened to be defeated. She's strictly the one to beat. But if for whatever reasons, if you think that she's vulnerable, then and you look elsewhere, I think Forever Unbridled, and as good as she's been during the course of her career, third in last year's Breeders' Cup Distaff, she runs really well fresh, does Forever Unbridled. Winning the Houston Ladies, the Apple Blossom, the Phipps, just missed in last year's Personal Ensign, and the Fleur de Lis, all off layoffs. I know there's a critique of Dallas Stewart and how he's handled Forever Unbridled, like he treats her like she's made of glass or something, but this is what she's responded well to. Off of a similar layoff last year, she finished third in the same race, defeated just 3 parts of the line. And you go to Rosario, who could have a big day as well on Saturday, riding Samaritan in the Travers. Dirt routes at Saratoga. Joel Rosario, past year in 24 starts, 21% win clip, in the money 63% of the time, and a solid 24% ROI.
Craig?
Yeah, I don't really have much to add. Just that, Songbird. When that last race, when we did the Delaware race, it's very similar when you look at the true odds that she's gonna, the pace isn't gonna be fast and she's gonna be controlling it. She looked like she struggled on that track, that she didn't handle it, and she still won. So, I'm not negative on her at all. I never have been, but I mean, I know some people are turning against her, and being a 4-year-old, maybe she is getting tired of racing. I don't know. I don't see it, and I'm not around the horse, so I don't know. But I think anyone who takes a chance, that's what they're banking on.
Well, I walked out of Saratoga yesterday with Joel Rosario, and I asked him his thoughts. He is hoping that he can stay within striking distance and try to tackle her at an appropriate time. It should be noted, Laffit, you talked about Hollendorfer, certainly unafraid to ship out of town, and particularly with his fillies. And I went after It's His Well last week in the Alabama, and I thought I got a very credible effort from her. It really is remarkable, the record that he's piled up over the years, the way Blind Luck would ship, and he's got such confidence going out of town. And I will mention that the Hort Martini Glass, who was second to her, the Songbird in the Del Cap, she came back and ran very credibly in that $200,000 stake at Thistledown, getting beat by Money's on Charlotte. So she, for those that thought that she was a tomato can, she came back actually and ran okay against the quality fillies. So that may have gone under the radar a little bit.
Yeah, they're not all going to be gems. She's been running at the highest level, a champion at 2, a champion at 3. These are video game numbers. 13 for 14, all that shipping, having earned more than $4.5 million. I'm not saying she's Rachel Alexandra, nor does she have to be. But every time they roll around here, aside from Beholder's Nose in the Breeders' Cup Distaff, she's unblemished. She's been perfect. And the crowd everybody will really perk up. I sensed that Belmont day. It almost felt like the energy changed after when she ran in the Phipps and being in the presence of greatness, and the chance to see her outside of California. Like you said, Hollendorfer doesn't protect. He is aggressive. It's old school. He's going to go after the bigger purse races. He's going to go after the more prestigious races. It's special when an American Pharoah runs at Saratoga. It's special when a Songbird runs it at Saratoga. And I think that for whether you're a handicapper, I think we're all horse racing fans. First that's what you embrace, the competitive nature. She's not running against two horses back at Del Mar and 1 to 1,000. She's here in the Grade 1 personal ensign running where she belongs.
Well, we'll make a point that, you know, on figures, Forever Unbridled, basically as fast as she is. Going for Broke is only a couple of lengths behind her. Hell, Floridora is only 3 or 4, 5 lengths behind her, and Eskin for Money probably 3 lengths in arrears of Songbird. So this could be more interesting than people want to give credit for, and it's going to be the early first Grade 1 of what will be one of the best days of racing in the world, frankly, not just North America, on Saturday. We're looking forward to it, and we're going to wish everybody the best of luck. We'll remind them you should be using, Craig, show them the chat room and how to ask questions and interact. You should be following Stats Raceland on Twitter as well as Laffit Pincay, and you can take advantage of the 2 offers that are out here till the end of the month through the 31st, 30% off the Racelands or True Odds subscriptions. Basically $1 a day for True Odds, $2 a day for the full use for all the tools in the arsenal at Stats Raceland. And then Travers 99 promo code. Take advantage through Sunday. $99, 3 months, $1 a day. You can't go wrong, and it'll take you all the way through Thanksgiving and all the great racing that we've got coming up September, October, November. We're going to talk to you in a few weeks. Another Stats Raceland's webinar. We'll thank Craig Walker. We'll be watching Laffit Pincay on television. And Laffit, what's the broadcast plan?
Oh, really excited. It's an hour-and-a-half broadcast. Donna Brothers, Nick Luck, Jerry Bailey, Randy Moss, and myself, and we're just building around the day. Now, granted, we're not on for 5 hours, so we won't have all the Grade 1 races, but we'll recap everything. We'll have live coverage of the Sword Dancer, of course, the Travers. Last year, a little bit of Arrowgate, and really now that this march towards the Breeders' Cup continues, no, the Travers is not a Breeders' Cup Challenge event, win and you're in, but it has produced the last 2 classic winners in American Pharoah and Arrowgate. It's a special time, it's a special day, and really looking forward to the broadcast. And now, you know, knocking out this Stats Raceland's webinar, I feel like I'm prepared. 2 birds, 1 stone. We're ready for the show.
Well, and we're going to certainly bring you back tomorrow for weekend preview at the races as well.
Absolutely.
All right. Wish everybody the best of luck. I'm glad you joined us, and we'll talk to you soon. Enjoy Travers weekend. Thanks, everybody.
Pleasure, guys. Thanks so much.
Good luck, everyone.